So I'm between everybody and leaving and food and stuff like that. That's awesome. First of all, thanks to everybody who actually took the time to attend here. I mean, one of the things that's really exciting for many of us in the room who are around from the beginning of AllJoin is to see that place where the technology and the ideas that you had have that life of their own. And I sort of was thinking about what's the analogy that I try to draw to this. For those of you that don't know who I am, I'm one of the people that actually co-invented AllJoin at the very beginning when we started this at Qualcomm. It was actually a skunkworks project while we were working on other stuff. And Greg can attest to that. It got laughed at a lot at the beginning because nobody understood what we were doing. But it's not, I started to think of the analogy, and it's not that place with your child where the child takes the first step, because so much of what's going on here is far beyond the first step. There are commercial products out there with this technology in it, and there's a market need for actually dealing with things at the edge of the network in a different way that we've been doing now. In fact, one of the impressions that I actually had when I came into the sessions and just sat in the back of the room and some of them and listened is, it's that part in your child's life where they go to school for the first time and you don't know what they're doing during the day. You don't know who their friends are. You don't know whether they're going to go all data-driven on you. You don't know where it's going to go. But at the same time, things are being accomplished and it's taking on that life of its own. So it's a very powerful thing to watch, but more importantly, it's powerful for all of us. So the quotes up here that are coming about what we're doing, people are noticing that the way we've been able to sort of work together as companies who both, compete with each other and actually recognize the need to collaborate is actually getting notice in the press and in the rest of the industry. And I think that's something we should all be very proud of. It's hard to do. It's really hard to do. And so while we may sit here in working groups and we have very passionate discussions, the power of this alliance is actually that around this concept, we're not just saying, here's something, take it, please, use it. We're saying, here's the basis of something that all of us will actually make better. And that's something that's really, I think, really interesting and something to be proud of. So this really started back in 2010. I mean, we first put it outside in 2011 when we were really playing around with at the beginnings of Android. How do we make phones talk to each other so we can build experience? And then it quickly turned into devices talking to each other. And then it quickly turned into, well, if we do a little bit more and build some frameworks, then we can have classes of interoperability much, much faster. And we actually got that as a poll from people that we were talking to in the industry. A year ago, there was no alliance, all right? That's kind of amazing, actually, to think about what we've been able to do in this kind of meeting that we're able to have in that one short year and the impact that it's having. And I like to say it's not because necessarily of one factor. The factors that really lent to all this is, first of all, the recognition that the people who helped form the alliance saw about how there's a problem to be solved, that there was a gap in the technologies that are out there in the marketplace, right? Another sort of anecdotal thing about AllJoin is when we first started working on this, actually the first thing I asked Greg to go do when we were starting to think about it and we wanted to do sort of a survey of technology is, please don't come back and say we're going to build something new. Let's actually try to use whatever's out there. We tried really, really hard to use UPnP and MDNS for discovery. We tried really hard to use a bunch of other technologies. And in fact, the core of AllJoin being dbus is we try to build on top of mature technologies for inter-app communication. So we didn't have to invent things that we don't have to invent. Because the hallmark of a useful open source project, as opposed to just an open source project, is that it solves a problem and it doesn't invent more than it needs to invent, because there's a lot of really good technology and software out there in the ecosystem. It's that economy that when we put it all together, you get interesting things like what's going to be discussed this afternoon in the alljoin.js project is take an open source JavaScript interpreter, an embeddable JavaScript interpreter, a very small JavaScript interpreter, things the size of a Lua interpreter rather than V8, right? And merge that with an edge node in AllJoin and get to the point where I can very quickly build things and bring them into this ecosystem by writing a couple lines of JavaScript to tie together a GPIO and an AllJoin message, right? An AllJoin API. That's extraordinarily powerful, but we've never gotten there if we hadn't thought about what problem are we trying to solve and then say, what problems are we not trying to solve, right? And that's, I think, a really important thing for us to think about. So to me, it's just sort of amazing to see the timeline that's up there and look at where things are going. The amount of momentum that I saw in the sessions is just extraordinary. The number of new companies that we talk to every week that are interested in finding out more, the number of both, those are both little companies and big companies, and I think there are going to be some very interesting announcements about membership in the Alliance over the next couple months. But the job isn't done unless we actually start getting this out there and into the commercial product. So at the same time, I want us to be really proud of where we are. The other thing I challenge all of us as members to do is think about what's between what we have now in the Alliance and in the GitHub repository and what you need for commercial deployment in your products. And then let's close that gap together, because that's what we need to do. If we don't do this, my concern is, and many of you who know me know that this is my real fear about this computing at the edge of the network, is that it will remain fragmented if we can't agree on how to get out there and really build an interoperable system that's useful to both businesses and consumers, right? The reason, sometimes people think that the reason that the web, HTTP and HTML succeeded was because of the client side only. Was, oh, I now had one thing that I can build. Because I was one of the people that first used Mosaic when it came out of UIUC. It was like really cool. It spoke 5, 10 different protocols at first. It spoke protocols that we don't even use anymore. Then all of a sudden, it just became about HTML, because everybody, instead of saying, I'm going to have this client speak FTP, we said, we're going to have the FTP server present an interface in HTML, right? And that flip meant not only that consumers got an interesting experience, but businesses could construct their businesses differently, right? And that's the thing we have to be careful about with AllJoyn, is that while we're building these consumer experiences, we're also building an ecosystem of APIs and interoperable services that we can collaborate on in a B2B kind of relationship. So I think all of those things together are going to really make the ecosystem explode. And if there are problems here, with what we have right now, or if there's gaps in what you need for commercialization, let's figure out a way to close those gaps together so that out there, we're not fighting the battle of how am I going to make device A and device B collaborate. We're going to say, what are the better ways that these things are either going to collaborate and compete in order to drive value for our businesses? So with that, I'd like to thank everybody again for attending. I'm not going to keep you away from your food anymore. I do encourage you, if you're interested in sticking around and learning more about the alljoyn.js stuff, because I think it's really interesting, and it's just an exemplar of the kinds of things that you then construct on top of a working system, much like you could put those sets of data APIs and that design metaphor on top of the same underlying technology and really solve a wide variety of problems. So I'd like to thank the folks that organized this at the Linux Foundation and all the committee leads. I'd like to especially thank Greg for leading the TSC. And with that, congratulations, and let's go eat.